Hi guys, welcome to a video, and in today's video I'm just going to be reviewing the 1999 film Aimée Jaguar. I've been meaning to review this film for a really long time because it's not only an important part of lesbian cinema, but it's a really important part of lesbian history. But let's get into it. If you're not familiar with Aimée Jaguar, it's about a dangerous love affair between the wife of a Nazi officer and a Jewish woman during 1943 Berlin, which is being bombed by the Allies and where the Gestapo are purging the capital of Jews. The film is also based upon Erica Fischer's book, which chronicles the real lives of Lily Wurst and Felice Schragenheim through their letters, poems, and photographs. And I do recommend that people check out Erica Fischer's book and the surrounding documentaries about Lily and Felice's love story because it is fascinating. So, first of all, I think Aimée Jaguar is a really beautiful and important film which shines a light on a piece of Jewish women's and lesbian history, which is so often underrepresented on screen, particularly in relation to World War II, which is largely documented through a heteronormative male perspective. In fact, the fresh historical perspective on what life was like during this era is definitely one of the reasons why this film is so interesting and stands out against so many other lesbian period films. I almost feel like in some ways the love story in this film is secondary to that of the portrayal of what life was like for Jewish women, particularly lesbian Jewish women in that period. And I quite like the balance that the film strikes between the lesbian romance and that portrayal of what Jewish women were experiencing during that period. We rarely see the intersection between Judaism and lesbianism explored on the screen, so the film is really special in that regard. Another thing I found interesting about this film was their portrayal of how during the war people went about their lives as normal in the midst of being bombed and surrounded by chaos, and it was a fascinating juxtaposition to see normalcy in the midst of such horror. And I found this particularly interesting in regard to Jewish women who are living under the threat of being taken away to the camps or murdered, yet despite this also going for drinks, visiting the cinema and enjoying their lives. It shows how even under extreme oppression they were still experiencing moments of joy and that their lives were not solely defined by those who sought to harm them. It just offers a fresh insight into what was going on in the lives of Jewish women in that period. It also doesn't sugarcoat the brutality of the Nazis and the rampant anti-Semitism which saw so many women and men openly murdered in broad daylight during this period. I'm sure most people are familiar with the horrific dehumanization and genocide of Jewish populations within this time, but to see it play out on screen is a grave reminder. I think the most important thing about this film is the way in which it humanizes people who were so dehumanized in this period by the society they were living in, particularly Jewish women and Jewish lesbians. In fact, lesbians in general. And whilst this film explores a very dark time, darkness does not define the lives of these women. They find small moments of joy and of love with each other, and it allows for connection with the audience, because for so long Jewish populations and lesbians had their voice stripped from them, especially in the war era where distorted perceptions of voiceless minorities led to prejudice and hatred, and their history and their experiences erased and told by somebody who wasn't them. And I think what's important about this film is it brings the narrative home, it brings the stories about these types of people back to a place of authenticity and allows us a fresh perspective on this period in time. The relationship between Lily and Felice is very romantic and intense, but it's also complicated. Felice is very free with her love, and this doesn't always sit well with Lily, who's very serious about their relationship and displays quite serious jealousy. But despite this, it's obvious that they're very deeply in love with one another, and I think the most potent scene in this film is when Lily gives a very touching speech about what Felicia means to her and how her previous experiences with men never quite lived up to expectations or made her feel the way that Felicia does. It's essentially a speech about realizing and accepting her sexuality and her love for Felicia. And in this very same scene, Felicia reveals to Lily that she's Jewish. And of course, this is a huge deal because it could have cost Felicia her life. Lily was married to a Nazi officer and was herself considered a Nazi at that time. And they really just lay their souls bare in front of each other. It was so raw, and I really commend the acting in this particular scene. It was really powerful. The love scenes also stand out in this film for a couple of reasons. Firstly, I like that they took a different approach to intimacy in this film, but I do think that's the most trembling that I've ever seen in a love scene ever. I mean, it was literally a visual representation of gay panic. It was. I also thought it was an interesting choice to show Felicia rejecting the intimacy from Lily in one scene, which shows how the film utilised intimacy to convey different feelings and shifting dynamics within their relationship, which again makes this film stand out from a lot of other lesbian films where the sole purpose of the love scene is to often show that they finally consummated their love. I do feel like this film implies that Felicia ultimately lost her life because of her love for Lily. And whilst this is true to an extent, I feel like the film really drives that point home, especially with the line, "She made me sign a contract forever. Sounds like a gravestone." However, the film also recognises that Felicia was the one who wanted to stay with Lily because she cherished that relationship and she cherished their moments together. She didn't want to lose her, and ultimately her choice is what shaped her destiny. But it's a bit of a grey area and a talking point, so I do understand why people would form different opinions around what happened to Felicia, because Lily is quite possessive, and you could almost view the fact that their love taking precedence over everything else was selfish on Lily's part because of the circumstances they were in. But ultimately, I do feel like it was Felicia's choice, and she felt the exact same way about their relationship taking precedence over everything else, even though she paid for it with her life. It's easy to sit on the outside and judge a situation, when in reality these kinds of things are incredibly complicated, and who knows what anybody would do if they were in that position. It's really difficult to say, but I do understand why people have varying opinions of Lily and of the way their relationship ended. From a technical standpoint, I think this film is decently made. The cinematography, the pacing and the editing are all pretty decent, and the art direction is beautiful. There's some really gorgeous pieces, some really gorgeous fashion in this film. I mean, I'm a sucker for 1940s aesthetic and fashion, so I definitely appreciated that aspect of this film, but the film is visually delightful. It is. Overall, I think Aimée Jaguar is an incredibly important piece of cinema, which gives us a rare insight into what life was like for lesbian Jewish women living in early 1940s Berlin. And it also offers us a fresh perspective of that period which we're not often exposed to. And given how much of lesbian history is dismissed and erased, I think we're incredibly lucky to have access to a production which breathes life into this incredibly fascinating love story. Okay guys, if you've seen Aimée Jaguar, let me know your thoughts on it down in the comments section below. Don't forget to subscribe for instant disappointment, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye!